Snow always began with a sound Jenny could hear before anyone else noticed. It was a hush, soft as a held breath, settling over the world just before the first flakes touched the ground. Jenny, a golden Labrador with a sugar-dusted muzzle and wise brown eyes, lifted her head from the braided rug by the hearth and listened. The cottage creaked gently around her, old beams sighing as if they, too, had been waiting for this moment. Christmas was coming. Jenny rose, joints popping quietly like tiny knots in a fire, and padded to the front door. Outside, the night had turned blue and deep, the kind of blue that belonged only to winter evenings when the moon hung low and patient. Snowflakes drifted down in slow spirals, catching the glow from the cottage windows and the lantern hanging by the gate. The air smelled of pine, wood smoke, and something faintly sweet, orange peel maybe or cinnamon, leaking from the warmth inside. She wagged her tail once deliberately. This was her season. The cottage was small, tucked at the edge of the woods like it had grown there on purpose. Ivy slept beneath frost along the stone walls, and a wreath of fir and dried cranberries hung proudly on the door. Inside, everything was just as it should be. Stockings dangled from the mantel. A kettle murmured to itself. The fire snapped and glowed, painting the room in amber and shadow. Jenny returned to her place near the hearth, circling twice before settling down. The rug smelled of wool and years of comfort. Above her, the mantel clock ticked steadily, a sound she had known her whole life. Every tick felt like a heartbeat, hers, the cottage, the night's. She wasn't alone, though the humans had gone to bed. Jenny was never truly alone. The cottage held memories the way trees held rings. She could feel them in the floorboards, hear them in the way the wind pressed against the windows. Christmases layered upon Christmases, all folded together like quilts in a cedar chest. Her eyelids drooped, heavy with warmth. As sleep began to tug at her, Jenny's mind wandered the way it always did, backward and outward, drifting through moments she loved. She remembered the first winter here. She had been younger then, all legs and enthusiasm, slipping comically across the frozen path as snow piled up faster than she could understand. The cottage had smelled new to her, fresh paint, old books, bread rising near the stove. She had chased snowflakes until her nose went numb and barked at her own breath, amazed by the way it puffed into the air like a ghost. That had been the year of the red scarf. Someone had wrapped it gently around her neck, hands warm and careful, laughing as Jenny tried to chew the tassels. The scarf had smelled like wool and soap and belonging. She still wore it sometimes, though now it fit a bit tighter and she preferred it loose. The fire popped louder, bringing her back. Outside, the snow thickened, layering the world into something softer, quieter. Even the forest seemed to lean in closer, listening. Jenny dreamed lightly the way old dogs do, one paw twitching, ears flicking at sounds both real and remembered. In her dream, she was running along the edge of the woods, paws flying, heart light. Bells rang somewhere, distant but cheerful. The moon followed her, always just ahead. Then another sound. A soft thump at the door. Jenny's eyes opened at once. She lifted her head, ears perked. The cottage was still, fire low but steady. The clock ticked. Outside, the snow fell thicker now, mooting everything. The sound came again, clearer this time. A small, uncertain knock, as if whoever, or whatever, stood on the other side wasn't sure they were welcome. Jenny stood. Her tail wagged slowly, thoughtfully. Christmas was a time for unexpected things. She padded to the door, nose low, sniffing. Cold air curled in through the cracks, carrying a scent she didn't recognize at first, something wild, something tired, something edged with fear and hope tangled together. She paused just for a moment, paw lifted. Then she barked once, not loud, not sharp, just enough to say, "I'm here." And with that, Jenny leaned forward and nudged the door, which creaked open into the snowlit night. The door opened with a familiar sigh, wood complaining softly as if it hadn't expected to be disturbed this late. Cold air slipped inside, brushing Jenny's nose and whiskers with icy fingers. Snow piled gently against the threshold, sparkling faintly under the lantern's glow. At first she saw nothing. Just the quiet swirl of snow, the sleeping fence posts, the dark shape of the woods beyond. Jenny leaned forward, sniffing again, more carefully this time. The scent was clearer now, damp wool, frost-bitten leaves, a trace of something metallic and old, like coins warmed by hands. And beneath it all, a tremble of life trying very hard to be brave. Her tail wagged. There, just beyond the step, huddled against the stone wall, was a small shape. It shifted as the door opened wider, startled but too tired to flee. Jenny lowered herself instinctively, chest to the ground, making herself less frightening. It was a rabbit, or almost one. Larger than the wild rabbits she sometimes watched from the window, with ears tipped in white and fur the color of toasted bread. A thin red ribbon was tangled around one leg, frayed and darkened with snowmelt. The rabbit's sides fluttered with shallow breaths, eyes wide and glossy in the lantern light. Jenny didn't bark, she didn't move too fast. She knew this moment. It was the same moment she had felt once, long ago, standing outside this very door with paws too big and heart too full, unsure if the warmth inside was meant for her. Carefully she sat down, just inside the doorway, blocking the wind. Heat spilled out behind her, a soft golden promise. The rabbit's nose twitched. It inched forward without seeming to realize it had done so, drawn by the fire's scent and the quiet certainty radiating from the old dog's steady presence. Jenny gave a gentle huff, her version of a smile. Snow gathered on her back, melting slowly into her fur, but she didn't mind. Christmas nights were meant for waiting. Inside, the kettle clicked as it cooled. Somewhere upstairs, the floor gave a small creak, the sound of someone turning in their sleep. The cottage breathed around them, patient and kind. The rabbit crossed the threshold at last. The moment its paws touched the warm stone floor, it shivered from nose to tail, then collapsed in a soft heap just inside the door. Jenny rose at once, nudging the door closed with her shoulder. The latch caught, sealing the cold away. She sniffed the rabbit gently, cataloging every detail the way dogs do: fear, exhaustion, gratitude, and something else, faint but glowing. Magic, perhaps, or simply Christmas. Jenny lay down beside the rabbit, curling herself into a protective crescent. Her body radiated warmth earned over years of naps and firesides. The rabbit pressed closer without fully waking, its breathing evening out little by little. Jenny rested her chin on the floor, eyes half-lidded. The fire crackled, responding as if pleased. As minutes passed, the cottage seemed to change, not visibly, but in the way a room feels fuller when someone beloved enters it. Shadows softened. The ticking clock slowed its insistence. Even the snow outside fell more gently, flakes drifting like they had all the time in the world. Jenny's thoughts wandered again, drifting the way embers do when the fire burns low. She remembered other nights like this. A lost lamb once, brought inside during a storm so fierce it rattled the windows. A shivering fox kit she'd watched from afar, leaving scraps by the wood's edge. She remembered hands stroking her ears, voices murmuring things she didn't need to understand to feel. "Good girl. Thank you." She knows. She did know. Jenny shifted slightly so the rabbit was tucked more securely against her chest. The ribbon tangled around its leg caught her eye. It smelled old, like it had been tied with care a long time ago and forgotten just as long. Slowly, carefully, Jenny began to work at it with her teeth, gentle as snowfall. Outside, something moved among the trees. Jenny's ears flicked. Not danger, no, nothing sharp or wrong. This presence felt curious, watchful, wrapped in the same quiet anticipation that filled the air when the first star appeared on Christmas Eve. The woods had a way of leaning closer on nights like this, as if hopping to be invited in. The ribbon loosened at last, falling away in a soft coil. The rabbit stirred, eyes blinking open. It looked up at Jenny, and for a moment the world held still. Then the rabbit did something unexpected. It spoke not in words, not exactly, but in a warm rush of understanding that flowed straight into Jenny's chest. Gratitude, relief, a promise not yet fully formed. Jenny exhaled slowly, accepting it the way she accepted everything else, with quiet faith. Upstairs, footsteps sounded, slow and sleepy, heading toward the stairs. A light flicked on, casting a pale glow through the banister slats. Morning, or something like it, was coming closer now. Jenny lifted her head, gaze moving between the rabbit, the fire, and the door that led out into the waiting woods. Christmas had only just begun. The footsteps paused at the top of the stairs. Jenny heard them clearly now, the familiar shuffle, the careful way the human placed each foot as if the night itself might be fragile. The light lingered, then dimmed again, and after a moment the steps retreated. Whoever had woken had decided in that gentle half-dream state that all was well. Jenny's tail thumped once against the floor. She lowered her head again, resting it near the rabbit, whose eyes were now fully open. They were darker than she had first thought, deep and reflective, like polished stones found at the edge of a stream. The rabbit didn't move away. Instead, it breathed in slowly, as if committing the scent of the cottage and Jenny herself to memory. Outside, the woods stirred. The wind threaded its way between the trees, carrying whispers of snow-laden branches brushing against one another. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, then fell silent. The sound echoed softly, settling into the stillness like a blessing. Jenny felt it then, a shift. Not sudden, not alarming, just the gentle sense that the night was turning a page. She rose carefully, joints stiff but steady, and padded toward the window. Frost traced delicate flowers along the glass. She stood there, gazing out, her breath fogging the pane. The lantern by the gate flickered, its flame bowing low as if greeting someone unseen. The rabbit followed, hopping softly, favoring its leg but moving with more strength than before. It stopped beside Jenny, tiny paws planted on the wide plank floor, and looked out as well. Together they watched. Snow blanketed the path now, smoothing it into a pale ribbon that led straight from the door and vanished into the trees. For a moment, Jenny imagined she saw shapes moving at the edge of the woods, nothing distinct, just impressions. A tall figure cloaked in shadow, a pair of glowing eyes that blinked and disappeared, the sense of many quiet watchers, patient and kind. Jenny's ears tilted forward. She had seen such things before, though never clearly. They belonged to the in-between places, the spaces between hearthlight and moonlight, between waking and dreaming. Christmas made those spaces thinner. The rabbit shifted beside her, and this time the understanding came again, clearer. I was meant to be found. Jenny didn't question it. She never questioned things that arrived with that particular warmth. Instead, she turned and walked back toward the hearth, knowing the rabbit would follow. The fire welcomed them with a soft crackle, sparks rising briefly before vanishing up the chimney. Jenny settled down again, slower now, easing herself onto the rug. The rabbit nestled against her shoulder, no longer trembling. Its ears drooped contentedly, eyes growing heavy. Time stretched. The clock ticked on, but it felt less like counting and more like humming, a lullaby for the house. The scent of pine grew stronger, as if the tree in the corner had leaned closer to the fire. Dried orange slices strung along the mantel caught the light, glowing faintly like small suns. Jenny drifted, half awake, half asleep. In this in-between place, memories came not as pictures but as feelings. The press of snow under her paws, the weight of a hand on her head, laughter, loss, love layered thickly like blankets piled high on a winter bed. She dreamed she was younger again, running through the woods with the rabbit bounding easily beside her. Bells rang overhead, louder now, closer. The trees were strung with lights, stars caught gently in their branches. The path never ended, but she wasn't tired. Then the dream shifted. She was back in the cottage, but it was fuller somehow. The walls gleamed. The table was set, though no one sat at it yet. Stockings bulged with unseen gifts. The air shimmered. Jenny stirred. The rabbit had risen and was standing near the door again, alert now, ears lifting. It glanced back at Jenny, and this time the understanding carried a note of apology, threaded with resolve. Jenny stood, her heart heavy and light all at once. She followed the rabbit to the door, nudging it open once more. Cold air rushed in, fresh and clean, bringing with it the scent of snow and something brighter, like starlight made solid. Outside, the woods were no longer empty. Figures stood among the trees just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow. They were not frightening, though they were strange, wrapped in cloaks of bark and frost, eyes shining softly. They watched in silence, waiting. The rabbit stepped onto the snow and turned back one last time. Jenny held its gaze. Her tail wagged slowly, deliberately. Some things were not meant to stay forever, but they were always meant to be welcomed. As the rabbit hopped toward the waiting figures, the snow began to glow faintly, light pooling around its path. Jenny remained in the doorway, steady and warm, guarding the threshold between worlds. Behind her, the fire burned on. Above her, the clock ticked. And somewhere deep in the woods, something ancient and gentle smiled as Christmas continued to unfold. Jenny stayed in the doorway long after the last glow faded into the trees. Snow drifted in around her paws, melting where it touched the warm stone floor. The woods slowly returned to themselves, dark, quiet, ordinary again. But the air still hummed, as if something wonderful had just passed through and left its echo behind. At last, Jenny stepped back inside and nudged the door closed. The latch clicked softly, final but gentle, like the closing of a book you know you'll open again. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the cottage air, grounding herself in familiar things. Smoke and pine, wool and old wood, the faint sweetness of baked apples lingering from earlier in the evening. The rabbit was gone. Jenny didn't feel sadness, not really. Instead, there was a calm fullness in her chest, the deep satisfaction of something done exactly right. She padded back toward the hearth, nails clicking quietly, and lowered herself onto the rug once more. The spot where the rabbit had rested still held a little warmth. The fire had burned low, settling into glowing embers that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Jenny watched them, eyes heavy, mind drifting again, but not quite into sleep. Upstairs, a door opened. This time, the footsteps came all the way down. Jenny lifted her head as the human appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wrapped in a thick cardigan, hair mussed from sleep. They paused when they saw the open space by the hearth, brows knitting slightly, as if sensing something just out of reach. "Well," the human murmured softly, voice still rough with dreams, "I thought I heard something." Jenny wagged her tail, slow and reassuring. The human knelt beside her, fingers sinking into the fur behind Jenny's ears. Their hands were warm, steady, familiar in a way that anchored the whole world. Jenny leaned into the touch, letting out a quiet sigh she didn't even know she'd been holding. "Good girl," the human whispered, resting their forehead briefly against Jenny's. "Always keeping watch." They glanced toward the door, then the window, then back at Jenny, as if expecting an explanation. Whatever they saw in her eyes made them smile, small and a little wistful. "Christmas," they said, like that explained everything. They rose, stirred the fire, added a single log. Flames caught quickly, blooming back into life. The room warmed again, shadows dancing across the walls. The human lingered a moment longer, rubbing Jenny's shoulder, then headed back upstairs, steps slow and peaceful. Soon the cottage slept again. Jenny settled fully now, tucking her paws beneath her chest. Outside, the snow continued its patient work, covering tracks, smoothing edges, turning the world into something softer and kinder by morning. Sleep found her gently. This time her dream was quieter. She dreamed of lying beneath an enormous tree, its branches heavy with lights and ornaments carved from memory, tiny wooden bones, bells, stars. Around her were others, animals of all kinds, old and young, some familiar, some strange. They lay together in warmth and understanding, no fear among them. At the center of it all burned a fire that never dimmed. Jenny felt no urge to run, no need to stand guard. For once she simply rested, her role fulfilled for the night. And yet, even in sleep, part of her listened. For the hush before snow. For the soft knock at the door. For the quiet certainty that Christmas was not a single night, but a season of thresholds, and that she, Jenny the Labrador, would always be there to keep them safe. Morning arrived the way it always did in the cottage, slowly, politely, as if it didn't wish to disturb anything important. Light crept through the lace curtains in pale ribbons, settling on the floorboards and climbing the legs of the table. The fire had reduced itself to a bed of ash and faintly glowing coals, still warm but no longer bright. Outside, the world lay hushed beneath a fresh blanket of snow, every shape softened, every sound muffled. Jenny woke before the humans did. She always did. Her eyes opened to the familiar ceiling beams, dark and steady overhead. For a moment she lay still, listening. The cottage made its morning noises, the distant tick of the clock, the gentle settling of wood as the cold pressed in from outside, the whisper of wind against the eaves. She stretched slowly, savoring the pull in her muscles, and rose to her feet. The rug was warm beneath her paws, still holding the memory of the fire. She sniffed the air, expecting, just for a heartbeat, to catch the rabbit's scent again. There was nothing. And yet something lingered. Jenny moved toward the door, nose low, tail swaying. The threshold smelled different now, cleaner somehow, like snow after it's been walked through by something important. She pressed her nose to the crack beneath the door and inhaled deeply. Yes, the woods had been busy. She stepped back as the sound of footsteps came from above. The human descended the stairs, humming quietly, pulling on thick socks. They paused at the bottom step when they saw Jenny standing alert by the door. "You're up early," they said, smiling. Jenny wagged her tail and trotted over, bumping her head gently against the human's leg. The human laughed softly and scratched her chest, then moved toward the kitchen. Soon the kettle was singing again. The smell of coffee filled the air, rich and grounding. Bread was sliced. Butter softened on the table. The cottage woke fully, stretching into the day. The human glanced outside and let out a low whistle. "Would you look at that?" they murmured. Jenny joined them at the window. The snow lay pristine except for one thing, a trail of small tracks beginning at the door and leading away toward the woods. They were delicate, precise, already half filled by drifting flakes. The human frowned slightly, then smiled. "Well," they said, as if to themselves, "I suppose Christmas comes and goes how it pleases." Jenny sat, tail thumping once. After breakfast, the human bundled up in layers, scarf wrapped high, boots pulled on with practiced ease. They grabbed the basket by the door, the one used for gathering kindling and checking the bird feeders. "Coming with me?" they asked. Jenny's answer was immediate. Outside, the cold was sharp but invigorating. Snow crunched beneath their steps as they made their way along the path. The woods stood tall and quiet, branches heavy with white. Sunlight filtered through, catching on ice crystals and setting them ablaze. Jenny moved ahead, nose working, reading the stories written in the snow. Deer had passed through earlier. A fox light-footed, birds hopping between bare branches, and there, faint but unmistakable, the trail from the night before. She followed it a short distance into the trees, stopping where it vanished entirely, as if the snow itself had decided to keep the secret. Jenny sat there, ears forward. The woods felt different now, content somehow, like a room after guests have gone, still warm with laughter. The human didn't rush her. They never did. They stood quietly, basket resting against their hip, and waited. After a moment, Jenny rose and turned back toward the cottage. Together, they walked home, breath puffing white in the cold air. The rest of the day unfolded gently. There were chores done slowly, decorations adjusted, a pot set simmering on the stove, filling the cottage with the smell of herbs and vegetables. Music played softly from the old radio, crackling between carols and long silences. Jenny spent much of it near the hearth, dozing, waking now and then to reposition herself or watch snow fall past the windows. Every so often, she would lift her head, ears pricking, as if she'd heard something just beyond hearing. As evening drew closer, shadows lengthened once more. The lantern by the gate was lit again, flame steady against the dark. The human placed a new log on the fire and hung a fresh stocking on the mantel, one extra this year, small and simple, as if added without quite knowing why. Jenny watched it sway gently, her tail giving a slow, thoughtful wag. Outside, the woods leaned closer. And somewhere far beyond sight, something ancient stirred, patient, expectant, as the quiet magic of Christmas gathered itself once more. The extra stocking stayed. No one spoke of it, not really. The human noticed it once or twice, paused beneath the mantel, fingers brushing the knit edge as if trying to remember when they'd decided to hang it. But then the kettle would whistle, or the fire would need tending, and the thought would drift away like breath in the cold. Jenny noticed everything. As twilight thickened into evening, she lay stretched before the hearth, chin on her paws, watching the room settle into its nighttime rhythm. Shadows deepened in the corners. The windows turned to mirrors, reflecting firelight and the soft glow of candles set carefully along the shelves. Outside, snow began again, lighter this time, flakes slipping down like secrets. The radio murmured quietly, a carol half remembered, half lost in static. The human hummed along while chopping vegetables, their movements unhurried, almost ceremonial. Jenny's tail thumped now and then, keeping time. Something about this night felt wider than the others. Not louder, not brighter, just fuller. Jenny sensed it in the way the cottage breathed, in the way the fire leaned toward the chimney as if listening. She sensed it in the woods, too, a low hum beneath the silence, like the earth itself had drawn a deeper breath. Dinner came and went. A bowl was set aside, steam curling upward, placed near the hearth where Jenny could reach it easily. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, then licked the bowl clean and nudged it neatly out of the way. The humans smiled at that, affection softening their tired eyes. "Such a good girl," they said, voice low and warm. Jenny accepted the praise with dignity, settling back down as the humans sank into the armchair with a book they didn't quite read. Pages turned now and then, but mostly the humans stared into the fire, thoughts wandering. Outside, the lantern flickered. Jenny's ears twitched. She lifted her head, gaze fixing on the front door. Nothing stirred, not yet, but the familiar hush settled over the world again, the same one she had noticed the night before snow fell. That held breath, that waiting. Her tail began to wag, slow and certain. The human glanced up. "What is it?" they asked softly. Jenny didn't bark. She simply stood and walked to the door, sitting neatly beside it, posture calm but alert. The human watched her for a moment, then set the book aside and rose. "You hear something I don't you?" Jenny's tail thumped once against the floor. The human hesitated, hand on the latch. For just a second, doubt flickered across their face. Then they smiled, the kind of smile that came from long familiarity with trusting this dog, this house, this life. They opened the door. Cold air swept in, fresh and clean, carrying with it the scent of snow and pine and something else, something bright, almost sweet. The path lay empty, smooth and white, the woods standing silent beyond. But the silence was not empty. Jenny stepped forward, standing between the human and the night, her body steady and warm. She sniffed the air, then looked back over her shoulder, meeting the human's eyes. It was all right. The human exhaled a small laugh. "Well," they murmured, "Merry Christmas, I suppose." They left the door open just a crack and returned to the fire, pulling a blanket around their shoulders. Jenny remained by the threshold, a quiet sentinel watching snow gather on the step. Time stretched again. The clock ticked, the fire whispered, the world held. Then, very softly, something shifted at the edge of the woods. Jenny saw it first, a glimmer like starlight caught in fur moving between the trees. Another followed, then another. Shapes emerged slowly, respectfully, never crossing into the lantern's full glow. They waited. Jenny did not growl. She did not retreat. Her heart beat steady and strong, filled with recognition rather than fear. She lay down at the doorway, body stretched long across the threshold, a bridge of warmth between inside and out. From the woods came a feeling, not words, not sound, but a gentle request. "May we?" Jenny's tail wagged, brushing the floor. Behind her, the human dozed lightly, unaware but unafraid, dreaming perhaps of bells and forests and old kindnesses remembered. Snow continued to fall. And Christmas, patient and quiet, leaned closer to the cottage once more. The night deepened, folding itself gently around the cottage like another layer of wool. Jenny remained where she was, stretched across the threshold, the cold brushing her paws while warmth flowed steadily from her chest into the open space. Snow dusted her whiskers, melted, then came again. She did not move. This was part of the work, the waiting, the knowing. The shapes in the woods grew clearer, not sharper but more present. They shifted and swayed, stepping forward a fraction, then stopping as though listening for permission that could not be spoken aloud. They were many, yet quiet as snowfall. Some were tall and narrow, like trees that had learned to walk. Others were small and round, low to the ground, eyes glinting kindly. Fur, feather, bark, shadow, bound together by the same soft, luminous patience. Jenny's ears flicked, catching a sound beneath the silence. "Bells." Not the bright clang of church bells or the sharp jingle of sleighs, but something deeper and older, like bells carved from wood and rung only once a year. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the trees, the snow, the stars overhead. Her tail wagged again, slow and reverent. The humans stirred in the chair, blankets slipping slightly from their shoulders. They murmured something unintelligible and smiled faintly, still dreaming. Jenny glanced back at them, then returned her attention to the night. A single figure stepped forward. It was taller than the rest, its shape wrapped in a cloak that shimmered faintly, as though woven from moonlight and frost. Where its face should have been was only a deeper glow, warm rather than blinding. It stopped just short of the lantern's light and bowed its head. Jenny felt the gesture like a hand placed over her heart. She rose carefully and stepped outside, just far enough that the door rested against her side, keeping the warmth close. Snow crunched beneath her paws. The cold nipped, but she hardly noticed. The figure knelt. The understanding flowed again, stronger this time, gratitude layered upon gratitude, ancient and profound. A promise kept, a threshold honored. The woods themselves seemed to exhale. Jenny stood still, accepting it all without pride, without question. She had never needed to know why. She only needed to know when. Behind her, the fire popped loudly, sending a brief shower of sparks up the chimney. The sound echoed outward, a signal as old as hearths themselves. The smaller shapes stirred. A few stepped closer, stopping where the snow met stone. One left something behind, a small bundle wrapped in dried leaves and twine, placed gently at the edge of the path. Another traced a symbol into the snow with careful precision, one that glowed faintly before fading. Jenny watched, memorizing nothing, trusting everything. At last, the tall figure rose. The bells sounded once more, softer now, like a lullaby nearing its end. The shapes began to withdraw, dissolving back into shadow and tree and night, leaving the woods quiet again. But the quiet was different now. Vo! Jenny turned and padded back inside, nudging the door closed behind her. The latch caught with a familiar click. The human slept on, breathing slow and even, the blanket rising and falling. The extra stocking on the mantel swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. Jenny lay down by the hearth, circling once before settling. Her bones ached pleasantly, the way they did after a long walk. She rested her head on her paws, eyes half-lidded. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, the fire burned steady and true. And somewhere between sleep and waking, between forest and flame, Jenny listened, always listening for the next hush, the next knock, the next moment when Christmas would need her again. The fire settled into a deeper rhythm as the night wore on, flames lowering themselves into a thoughtful glow. Jenny did not sleep, not fully. She existed in that comfortable middle place she had learned over years, where rest and watchfulness braided together. Her ears remained tuned to the quiet, her body loose but ready, her heart steady. The human shifted in the chair, the book slipping to the floor with a soft thud. Jenny's eyes opened a little wider at the sound, but when the human only sighed and pulled the blanket closer, she relaxed again. The cottage was doing its job, holding everyone gently. Outside, the snowfall thinned. Clouds parted slowly, revealing stars sharp and bright, scattered like spilled sugar across velvet. Moonlight stretched itself across the clearing, pale and generous, touching the gate, the fence, the lantern, the very edge of the woods. Jenny felt it then, not urgency but invitation. She rose quietly and padded to the window, peering out. Her reflection stared back at her for a moment, an old Labrador with soft eyes and a body shaped by years of love. Then the glass showed her more than that. It showed the path again, faintly glowing beneath moonlight, extending not just into the woods but into something deeper, something layered atop the familiar forest. The world was thinning again. Jenny's breath fogged the glass. She wagged her tail once thoughtfully, then returned to the hearth. She lay down deliberately, as if choosing a place not just in the room but in the story of it. Sleep finally found her, deep and warm. This dream was different from the others. She dreamed of walking, not running, along a long road made of packed snow and starlight. The road curved gently, never hurrying her. On either side stood cottages like hers, each one glowing softly from within. At every door sat a dog. Some were young, some old. Some stood alert, others slept curled tight. All of them lifted their heads as Jenny passed, eyes kind and knowing. She understood without being told. These were keepers too. Further along, the road widened into a clearing where a great fire burned under an open sky. Around it gathered figures both familiar and strange, animals, humans, things made of wind and bark and memory. They spoke without sound, laughed without noise. Above them all hung a massive tree, its branches heavy with light, roots sinking into every forest that had ever existed. Jenny did not step into the circle. She did not need to. She lay down at the edge of the clearing, content to watch, content to be exactly where she was. The fire warmed her. The stars watched over her. Somewhere far away, a bell rang once, then faded. When she woke, the sky was beginning to pale. Dawn arrived shyly, blushing pink and gold along the horizon. The cottage stirred with it. The fire sighed its last and settled into ash. A bird landed on the fence outside, shaking snow from its wings. Jenny stretched and stood, joints stiff but willing. She walked to the door and sat, waiting. Soon footsteps sounded upstairs. The human descended, slower this time, eyes still heavy with sleep. They stopped short when they saw Jenny by the door. "Already," they murmured, smiling. They opened the door together. Cold morning air rushed in, clean and sharp. The world outside gleamed, trees iced in silver, the path pristine once more. But near the gate, half hidden beneath fresh snow, something rested. The human noticed it too. They stepped forward, brushing snow aside to reveal the small bundle wrapped in dried leaves and twine. They frowned, puzzled, then knelt to pick it up. The bundle was light, warm. Jenny watched closely, tail wagging low. The human loosened the twine carefully. Inside lay a small bell, dark with age, etched with patterns that seemed to shift when the light caught them. When the human touched it, their breath caught, not in fear, but in recognition they could not name. "Well," they whispered, "would you look at that?" They glanced at Jenny, eyes shining a little. "Did you see who left it?" Jenny only tilted her head. The human laughed softly and stood, bell cradled in their hands. Together they returned inside. The bell was placed gently on the mantel, just beneath the extra stocking. It did not ring, but the air around it felt fuller for its presence. Breakfast came next. The kettle sang. Bread toasted. Life resumed its gentle rhythm, though threaded now with something brighter, something humming just beneath the ordinary. Jenny lay by the hearth again, watching snow melt off boots, listening to the radio crackle awake. Every so often, her ears twitched toward the woods, as if listening for something far away but moving closer. Christmas was still unfolding. And Jenny, steady and kind, waited, ready for whatever the hush might bring next. The bell did not ring. Not that morning, not as the kettle cooled or the radio murmured through familiar carols. It rested quietly on the mantel, dark and patient, as if it had learned long ago that the right moment could never be rushed. Jenny kept one eye on it. She dozed through the morning, shifting only when the sun crept far enough across the floor to warm her paws. Outside, the day unfolded gently. The humans shoveled a narrow path from the door to the gate, their breath rising in soft clouds. Birds gathered at the feeder, feathers fluffed against the cold. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, a brief, bright sound carried on the winter air. Jenny lifted her head at that, tail thumping softly. Joy always traveled farther at Christmas. By midday, the cottage smelled of baking again, something sweet this time, rich with butter and spice. The human hummed as they worked, moving with easy confidence, glancing now and then at the mantel, at the bell, at Jenny. "You know," they said aloud at one point, as if continuing a conversation that had been going on for years, "I don't remember buying that stocking." Jenny's ears flicked, but she remained still. The humans smiled to themselves. "Ah well, feels right somehow." Outside, clouds gathered once more, heavy with the promise of more snow. The light dimmed early, the way it always did this time of year, afternoon sliding quietly into evening. Jenny stirred as the hush returned. It settled slowly, like a shawl placed around the shoulders of the world. Sounds softened. Even the wind seemed to step carefully now. The bell on the mantel caught the firelight and glimmered faintly, patterns shifting again, like leaves moving underwater. Jenny rose and padded closer to the hearth, placing herself where she could see both the door and the mantel at once. Her posture was calm but purposeful. This was a night for noticing. The human lit candles and drew the curtains, shutting out the growing dark. Supper was simple, eaten slowly. The extra stocking hung quietly, its empty shape full of possibility. When the dishes were done and the chair reclaimed, the human reached for the bell. They hesitated. Jenny watched intently as their fingers brushed the metal. The bell was cool, heavier than it looked. The human turned it over in their hands, tracing the etched patterns. "It's strange," they murmured. "I feel like I'm not supposed to ring it unless it rings itself." Jenny's tail wagged once. The human set the bell back down, a little reverently this time, and leaned back in the chair. The fire crackled. The clock ticked. Outside, snow began again, thicker than before. Jenny felt the wood stir. Not all at once, just a subtle shifting, like many small breaths taken in unison. The path beyond the door blurred as snow fell faster, erasing edges, softening the world into something dreamlike. Then faintly, very faintly, came the sound. A single chime. Not from the bell on the mantel. Jenny's head snapped up, ears forward, heart steady. The sound had come from beyond the door, carried on the snow-laden air. It rang once, clear and deep, then faded. The human sat up straighter. "Did you hear that?" Jenny was already on her feet. She moved to the door and sat, gaze fixed, tail wagging slowly. The human followed, placing a hand on the latch but not opening it yet. Another chime sounded, closer this time. The bell on the mantel trembled. Not enough to ring, but enough that its presence filled the room. The etched patterns glowed faintly, then dimmed again. Jenny felt it in her bones. This was not a request. This was an arrival. She looked back at the human, eyes soft but certain. The human swallowed, then nodded, as if agreeing to something they didn't fully understand but trusted all the same. They opened the door. Snow rushed in, thick and swirling, carrying with it the sound of bells, many now, layered and gentle. Beyond the lantern's glow, shapes moved once more at the edge of the woods, closer than before, their outlines softened by falling snow. Jenny stepped forward, steady as ever, and the world leaned in to meet her as Christmas drew itself wider still. The snow thickened instantly. as if the night itself had been waiting for the door to open. Flakes spun in wide, lazy spirals, catching lantern light and firelight alike, turning the space between cottage and woods into something almost liquid. The bells sounded again, nearer now, but still gentle, never demanding. Each note lingered, sinking into the ground, into the trees, into Jenny's chest. She stood firm at the threshold, snow gathering along her back, melting slowly into her fur. The cold kissed her paws, sharp but clean. She welcomed it. This, too, was part of the work. The human remained just behind her, one hand resting lightly on the doorframe, the other unconsciously placed over their heart. They did not step forward. They understood, instinctively, that this moment belonged to Jenny. Out beyond the lantern's glow, the shapes moved closer. Not all at once. One by one, like guests arriving at a gathering where they knew they would be welcome but still wished to be polite. The tall figures came first, cloaked in frost and bark, their movements slow and careful. Then the smaller ones, round-bodied, furred, feathered, horned, padding softly through the snow. Some left no tracks at all. The woods seemed to bow. Jenny felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. Not heat exactly, but purpose. She stepped forward, placing herself fully outside now, body aligned with the path, her presence a clear line drawn between worlds. The bells softened. A figure stepped into the lantern light at last. It was not the same one from the night before, though it carried the same quiet authority. This one was shorter, wrapped in layers that looked like knitted moss and wool, eyes bright and kind beneath a hood rimmed with frost. It carried something cradled in both arms. Jenny sat. The figure stopped and lowered itself into the snow, careful not to loom. For a moment, neither moved. Snow fell between them, time stretching thin and luminous. Then the figure leaned forward and placed what it carried gently onto the ground. It was a box, small, wooden, worn smooth by many hands. Holly leaves were carved into its lid, their edges softened with age. A ribbon, deep red, familiar, was tied around it. Jenny's tail wagged. The figure withdrew, backing away slowly, never turning its back. The bells chimed once more, then faded into the hush of falling snow. One by one, the others followed, retreating into the trees until the woods stood empty again, dark and quiet as they had always been. But the quiet was changed. Jenny approached the box. She sniffed it carefully. It smelled of pine resin and old paper, of fire smoke and winter nights layered upon one another. It smelled of waiting. Behind her, the human whispered her name, barely louder than breath. Jenny glanced back, then nudged the box gently with her nose, pushing it toward the threshold. Together, they brought it inside. The door closed with a soft click, sealing the warmth in. Snow continued to fall beyond the window, but the cottage glowed brighter now, as if pleased. The human knelt on the floor, hands trembling slightly as they untied the ribbon. The lid creaked when it opened, releasing a scent like dust and memory and something sweet beneath it all. Inside were letters. Dozens of them neatly stacked, tied with twine yellowed by time. Some envelopes were crisp, others worn thin. Names were written on them in many different hands, some careful, some hurried, some shaky with age. The human stared, breath caught. Jenny lay down beside them, close enough that her warmth touched their knee. One letter slipped free and fell open on the floor. The human did not pick it up right away. They only looked, eyes filling with something bright and heavy all at once. Jenny leaned in and pressed her head gently against the human's leg. The fire crackled louder, responding. Outside, the bells did not ring again, but somewhere far off, deep in the woods, something listened, patient and content, as the story of the night continued to unfold. The human read the letter slowly. Not all at once, that would have been impossible, but one by one, carefully, as if each deserved its own breath, its own pause. They sat on the rug beside the hearth, Jenny pressed close, her solid warmth a steady anchor as the firelight danced across the pages. The letters were not addressed to anyone in particular. Some were apologies, written too late. Some were thank yous, written by hands that had trembled but meant every word. Some were simple notes of love, plain and earnest, meant to be given on ordinary days that never quite came. All of them carried the same quiet truth, that kindness mattered, that small moments endured, that love did not vanish simply because time moved forward. As each letter was read, the cottage seemed to soften further, walls leaning in like old friends. The fire burned brighter without consuming its fuel too quickly, as if it understood the importance of this night. Even the clock slowed its ticking, stretching time gently instead of measuring it. Jenny watched the human's face, her wise eyes catching every shift of emotion. Tears quietly brushed away, smiles that came unexpectedly, long pauses where the human simply stared into the flames, remembering. At last the box was empty. The human closed it carefully and rested both hands on the lid. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Snow continued to fall outside, but more lightly now, flakes drifting down like the final notes of a song. "I think," the human said softly, voice steady despite everything it carried, "I think these were never meant to be kept." Jenny's tail wagged once. Together they stood. The human placed the box back on the mantel, beside the bell and beneath the extra stocking. The letters were returned inside, not hidden away but resting complete. Then the human did something they hadn't planned. They fetched a piece of paper and a pen from the desk by the window and knelt once more on the floor. Jenny sat beside them, posture attentive but relaxed, the way she always was when something important was happening. The pen moved slowly. When the human finished, they folded the paper carefully and placed it into the extra stocking. For a moment, they hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a kiss to Jenny's head, right between her ears. "Thank you," they whispered. They didn't specify for what. They didn't need to. The bell on the mantel rang. Just once. The sound was clear and deep, filling the cottage and spilling outward into the snow-covered world. It lingered, then faded, leaving behind a silence that felt complete rather than empty. Jenny let out a long, contented sigh. The fire settled. The candles burned low. Outside, the woods stood peaceful and still, no longer leaning closer, no longer waiting. Whatever had needed to pass through had done so. Whatever had needed welcoming had been welcomed. As the human prepared for bed, moving quietly, reverently, Jenny returned to her place by the hearth. She circled once, twice, then lay down, muscles easing, heart full. Sleep came easily this time. Her dreams were simple. She dreamed of warm hands and open doors, of paths that always led home, of bells that rang only when they were truly needed. She dreamed of the cottage standing through many winters yet to come, light always glowing in its windows, a dog always waiting by the fire. When morning arrived, it came bright and clear. The storm had passed. Snow lay smooth and perfect, untouched by tracks. Sunlight poured through the windows, gilding the room. The extra stocking still hung on the mantel, now gently weighted by the letter inside. The bell rested quietly beside it, its work done for now. The human woke smiling, though they couldn't quite say why. Jenny rose, stretched, and padded to the door, tail wagging. Christmas had settled into the cottage. not as a single night but as a way of being. And Jenny the Labrador, keeper of thresholds and quiet miracles, was right where she belonged, ready for whatever gentle magic might come next.